Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee are permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, please keep your microphones muted unless speaking. Should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I will request that the member please mute their microphones. To insert a document into the record, please have your staff email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. So good morning. 3 weeks ago, President Biden signed the most consequential infrastructure bill of the 21st century into law. The $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will modernize America's decaying infrastructure while making the biggest investment in inner-city passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak. The IIJA is a culmination of the work that, along with Chairman DeFazio, I started with the Invest in America Act. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize Chairman DeFazio's distinguished service to the Transportation Infrastructure Committee and this body and this country. Chairman DeFazio has been a champion for advancing the state of transportation in America and making meaningful efforts to address climate change. I am proud to have accomplished many great things with him and the privilege of chairing this subcommittee. Chairman DeFazio will be sorely missed, and I wish him and his family well in their next chapter. There you are. The IIJA contains $35 billion in authorized funds for competitive intercity passenger rail and freight rail grants programs, as well as Amtrak. It also contains a historic $66 billion in reliable investments for our national rail system, roughly the amount that Congress has appropriated to Amtrak since we created the railroad 50 years ago. Of the appropriated amounts, Amtrak will receive $22 billion in dedicated funding, which will enable it to address its significant maintenance backlog across all three of its services: the Northeast Corridor, state-supported services, and long-distance trains that connect rural areas to urban centers. In the next few years, I expect we will see new and improved accessible stations, rolling stock, and associated maintenance facilities. Another $44 billion is made available for competitive grant programs to create new or expand or improve intercity passenger rail corridors across the country. It jumpstarts previous service and eliminates and improves highway railroad grade crossings and improve the safety, efficiency, and reliability in freight rail and intercity passenger rail networks. This is truly a once-in-a-generation investment that will change the course of intercity passenger rail transportation in America, and it is an honor to be chairman of this subcommittee at this extraordinary moment. We will hear from Amtrak today about its Connect Us plan, which proposes to partner with states across the U.S. to improve existing or add new state-supported service routes that could add tens of millions of riders annually, creating new travel opportunities while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And today's other witnesses, representing various states, agencies, and regions, will talk about their proposals for leveraging these funds to carry out their plans for growing intercity passenger rail. In my region of the country, one of the most consequential projects that investments in the IIJA can address is the Gateway Program. The Gateway Program is a collection of the nation's most pressing infrastructure projects along the nation's busiest rail corridor, the Northeast Corridor. Chief among the Gateway programs is the rehabilitation and replacement of the rail tunnels that run under the Hudson River, connecting New Jersey with New York City. The tunnel is 111 years old, and it is in advanced state of decay due to its age and the damage sustained during Superstorm Sandy. If the tunnel were to shut down for any reason, it would cost this economy $100 million per day in lost economic output. Throughout my time in Congress, I've been a vocal advocate for the need to repair the existing tunnel and build a new one to keep trains running and allow for additional capacity. I am proud that the IIJA provides funding that could be used to finally complete the project. I am also grateful to the Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg for their supportive efforts to do so. In addition to the Gateway Program, the IIJA will facilitate other critical, important intercity passenger rail projects in the country. These investments will create good jobs, open a path for many to choose a career in the railroad industry. And I will fight to ensure that the quality of the jobs are available to all Americans and that everyone has a fair shot at obtaining work created from these investments. I was particularly pleased that Mr. Corbett, Secretary Kim, and Mr. Gardner addressed these issues head-on in their testimony. I continue to urge all our federal grant recipients of this importance. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to their testimony. I ask unanimous consent that statements from the Association of American Railroads, Rail Passenger Association, and the States for Passenger Rail Coalition be entered into the record. Without objection, so ordered. I now call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Crawford, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you for the witnesses for participating. Today's hearing will examine how Amtrak should spend the record amounts of federal funding it received in the Surface Infrastructure Bill signed into law last month. The law gives the railroads $66 billion over the next 5 years, with most of this money going to Amtrak. While Amtrak has announced plans to expand its routes, it's imperative that Amtrak first address the pressing issues with its existing system, such as much-needed maintenance and safety upgrades. Amtrak must also work to recover from historic losses last year that led to it receiving billions of dollars in federal bailout money to keep it operating despite record low ridership. Amtrak must strive to use its taxpayer money responsibly and in a way that attracts riders and makes a profit. Moreover, it's important that Amtrak work to strengthen its relationship with the states, including through developing a transparent and fair cost allocation policy with the states for state-supported Amtrak routes. Finally, any potential expansion of Amtrak's system must include the full input of the freight railroads on capacity and track sharing issues. The ongoing supply chain crisis only further emphasizes the value of freight railroads in efficiently moving goods across the nation. The important work of the freight railroads cannot be obstructed. I commend the chair for holding this hearing today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Now call on, recognize Mr. DeFazio, the chairman of the full committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for this hearing. Thanks for the kind words. You'll have to put up with me for another 12 months or so, but those were very kind words. You know, during the entirety of my long congressional career, 35 years, Intercity Rail has had funding starts and stops, threats to be disbanded, endured the whims of our annual appropriation process. No way to run a railroad, shall we say, in terms of being able to strategically plan for the investments you need to improve service, to provide additional service, to acquire new power and new train sets. There's someone's isn't muted out there, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Can you please mute your lines? Thank you.
Train gone up, 96 hours gone up. Don't campaign. No secret soul, don't campaign.
Members, please mute.
Mr. Cohen?
Okay.
Wow. Okay, don't know what was going on there. In any case, the enactment of the Passenger Rail Improvement Act in '08 began to provide a little more certainty, but the states anticipated a federal partner with about $90 million a year. But then that number shot up to $8 billion with the passage of the American Recovery Reinvestment Act, an additional $2.5 billion the following year. But then it dropped off again, and then it climbed up again during the FAST Act when Congress authorized hundreds of millions more. But that has caused Amtrak to limp along with, again, not being capable to look at reasonably expanding service and then look at plans to rebuild the network and to repower although they are in the process of acquiring new power and train sets. So the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act is revolutionary in my very long tenure in Congress, 35 years, in that there's guaranteed and robust funding for the next 5 years. $66 billion in appropriated reliable funds and another $35 billion in authorizations, which will not necessarily be easy, but the authorization is there. The appropriated funds in this bill are 6 times the amount we did under the FAST Act, and the FAST Act was pretty good for rail comparing to what we've been doing. And this will be way bigger, and it provides competitive grant funding for states to lead the development, new and expanded corridors, incentivize interstate compacts, creates inventories of projects in the Northeast corridor for major infrastructure investments, bridges, stations, tunnels. Don mentioned a 111-year-old tunnel. Well, the tunnel under Baltimore is 149 years old. And if you go through in the viewing car, you can see that it's raining inside because of the leaking water mains, and it's brick. How long is that mortar going to hold? We had great engineers in the late 1800s, apparently, but these things don't last forever. And if that tunnel goes down, it'll be disastrous for freight and passenger movement in the northeastern United States. And the costs over the time to build an alternate under the river or there far exceed the cost of making the investment and getting ahead of the problem. These are investments that we should be making. And I also supported the idea of Amtrak doing additional investments in intercity passenger rail, particularly looking at city pairs where they could, it used to be everybody took the shuttle to New York from here. Now a vast number of people prefer to take the train. And that's just one city pair route. There are many others around the country, somewhat longer than that, where you could divert people from the highways, where you could divert people from the inconvenience of commuter air. By the time you go to the airport, go through security, get on the plane, get delayed, get off the plane, get, wherever you're going from the airport. So I think there's tremendous potential there, both to deal with greenhouse gas reduction, congestion, and quality of life for the American people. We had a great testimony earlier this year from the Virginia Secretary of State. I don't know if it'll change now the Republicans have taken over. Maybe they'll go back to doing things the old way, which doesn't work. there were plans to build 2 more lanes on 95, take about 10 years, cost $12 billion, and the projections were, when they finished it, it would be as congested as it is today. It's called induced demand. Build it and they will come. They came to a novel agreement with CSX to provide a new rail route, essentially or partially a new rail route with a new rail bridge over the river here in DC for a lesser cost, and it's going to be able to, ameliorate the commute time of, many people and move them much more fuel efficiently. Hopefully that'll stick. I tried to, in the INVEST Act, say that before building major highway projects, states and cities had to look at whether or not rail transit alternatives could solve the problems better. Unfortunately, that was stripped out by the Senate. They considered, considering anything other than building more highways to be problematic. But it doesn't work. I had a number as we were doing the bill. I can't remember how many tens of thousands of miles were built in our inner cities in the last 30 years, and they're more congested than ever. We've got to look at these sorts of viable alternatives. But the other key thing we're going to need, like happened in the case with Virginia, is cooperation with the freights. We have the greatest freight network in the world, and we don't want to jeopardize that. It's the second most efficient way to move cargo after water. So we want to encourage it. But the point is, the law is pretty clear. Preference over freight transportation, except in an emergency, intercity and commuter rail passenger transportation provided for Amtrak has preference over freight transportation in using a rail line junction crossing unless the board orders otherwise under this subsection. Well, obviously that has not been observed, and that is of concern. As the trains get longer and longer, I got Chrissy funds to help build a siding so we could move trains more efficiently between Eugene and Portland, Oregon. It takes about over 3 hours. It's 110 miles. Now the length of the trains UP is going to run are going to be too long for the siding, which is, there's got to be some compromise here that can both better utilize the rights of way or utilize reserved rights of way that the railroads aren't using now, somehow something that's mutually beneficial, as it was for CSX in Virginia, because they got access to new rail bridge and the other rail bridge is at 99%. I think there are places around the country where that could happen. And I'm hoping that this amount of funding and a new attitude on the part of freight to sit down and actually talk will move us in that direction. So I look forward to hearing about the plans for the witnesses in the hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And once again, I want to say, wish you well in your next chapter. You've been a true inspiration for me and your leadership of this committee. So thank you. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Mr. Stephen Gardner, President of Amtrak. And at this point in time, I'd like to yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It gives me great pleasure and I'm honored to introduce David Kim, Secretary of California Transportation Agency. Many of our colleagues are familiar with Mr. Kim's distinguished career, having worked for the Federal Highway Administration, the Governor of California, the Mayor of Los Angeles, and our former colleague, Mr. Becerra. Mr. Kim has been a transformative leader of our state's transportation agency, working very hard for our local communities to reduce congestion, improve freight movement, and provide for a cleaner transportation system. And by the way, I may mention he has been very accessible to me. Thank you, Mr. Kim, for your work on behalf of our state and for your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Our next witness is Mr. Kevin Corbett, President and CEO of New Jersey Transit and co-chair of the Northeast Corridor Commission, and he's here on behalf of the Northeast Corridor Commission. a gentleman that I work very closely with and is a great leader of that organization. And then we have Ms. Julie White, Deputy Secretary of Multimodal Transportation, North Carolina, Department of Transportation, and Commission Chair of the Southern Corridor Commission. Next, we have Ms. Donna DiMartino, Managing Director, Los Angeles, San Diego, and St. Louis Obispo Rail Corridor Agency. Sorry, I kind of tore that up. And last but not least, Mr. Knox Ross, Mississippi Commissioner and Chair of the Southern Rail Commission. Thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since your written testimony has been made part of the record, subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Mr. Gardner, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman DeFazio, Chairman Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, members of the subcommittee, and my fellow witnesses. I'm Amtrak President Stephen Gardner, and thank you for inviting me to testify today. Let me begin by acknowledging Chairman DeFazio for his years of public service and thanking him for being a huge champion of Amtrak. His work has shaped the nation for decades. With the enactment of this historic bipartisan infrastructure law, it will continue to do so for many years to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll sorely miss your leadership as you leave Congress. For the past 50 years, Amtrak has described to Congress how intercity passenger rail could substantially benefit the nation if it only received the adequate and reliable funding it needed like other modes. Today, I'd like to say something different. Thank you. Thank you for helping to enact this law and create a new era of rail mobility that can support our nation's economic and environmental goals. With the $66 billion provided to the Federal Railroad Administration and Amtrak, we and our partners can finally have the chance to renew, improve, or replace antiquated assets like the century-old bridges and tunnels in the Northeast, inaccessible stations around the nation, and our vintage trains. With these funds, advancing long-stalled projects like the Gateway Program with my good friend Kevin Corbett, replacement of our legacy fleets that serve states like North Carolina and California, and investing in core IT and maintenance facilities that support the whole network will finally be possible. In addition to modernizing our assets, the bipartisan infrastructure law also creates a process for the FRA to identify and provide grants to enhance intercity corridor routes across the nation. With strong state rail planning in place and Amtrak's own nationwide vision of corridor expansion released earlier this year, there are many great investment opportunities for the FRA to consider. I would note the reintroduction of Gulf Coast service, the development of California's Coachella Valley service, and the activation of the Raleigh to Petersburg S-Line routes as prime examples. Amtrak looks forward to partnering with the states, Deputy Administrator Bose, Secretary Buttigieg, host railroads, and others to bring more intercity service to more people across America. And we know that critical to the success of this is the update of the Section 209 cost-sharing policy required by the new law. We understand that states need more predictability and control of their cost structure under this policy, and we're committed to work with our partners to update this paradigm for the new era. Additionally, we'll continue to work collaboratively with our partners where they see value in working with other parties to deliver parts of their service, and with new railroad entities that aim to develop or deliver their own service. We simply ask that key railroad laws like the Railway Labor Act and railroad retirement apply to new entrants, that the federal government gets equity and accountability for investments it makes in private systems, and that any new services create connections with Amtrak's national network. As exciting as the bipartisan infrastructure law is, there are some challenges that we and our partners will have to face in the coming years. I'd like to highlight a few today. First, while getting ready to launch this new era, we must continue to survive the pandemic. We've now just achieved about 70% of our historic ridership levels and restored most of our services. But the Omicron variant demonstrates the pandemic is far from over, and we must continue to drive the health and safety measures needed to protect passengers and employees. A critical component of those measures is our employee vaccine mandate. As we implement this requirement, we're hopeful that many of the roughly 5% of our workforce that has yet to get vaccinated will do so by our deadline of January 4th, which aligns with the federal contractor mandate. In case that doesn't occur, however, we anticipate proactively needing to temporarily reduce some train frequencies across our network in January to avoid staffing-related cancellations, with our plan to fully restore all frequencies by March or as soon as we have qualified employees available. We'll keep this subcommittee apprised of the situation as we learn more about employee compliance over the next week. Further, in order to effectively implement the infrastructure bill, we and our partners will need to significantly grow and broaden our workforce and supplier base. We're anxious to partner with our labor unions and others to develop new employees and build a more diverse group of suppliers in the communities that we serve. Finally, while the legislation contains very important planning provisions meant to guide network investment, we're also concerned that the current framework could restrict the states and Amtrak's ability to quickly advance projects that are ready to go now. We look forward to working with the FRA, NEC Commission, states, and Congress to work through these challenges. I will end my remarks by once again saying thank you to the members of this subcommittee and to you, Chairman Payne. With the funds provided by the infrastructure bill and your support moving forward, Amtrak and our state and commuter partners' vision for a modern passenger rail network can finally become a reality. While Amtrak will still require annual appropriations to fund our basic operations and capital expense, the funds dedicated to address the deferred backlog and support network growth in this bill will forever change the course of our industry. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. And it looks like we're finally getting to a point where Amtrak will finally receive the dollars that it was promised 50 years ago. And I've been an advocate on reiterating that over my time here in Congress. And it looks like we finally made it. So we look forward to the new prospects for Amtrak. Next, we will hear from Mr. Kim. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Good morning, Chairman DeFazio, Chairman Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to testify. And Congressman Napolitano, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And it's great to see you. And thanks to all members of the committee for your leadership in securing passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which, as previously noted, provides record levels of federal investment for intercity rail. The first point I'd like to make at the outset is that California's sustainable transportation strategy is based largely on reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions by shifting passenger transportation from highways to rail. We're also aggressively supporting the development of clean, zero-emission technologies. The IIJA will support climate-friendly policies California has led the nation in developing. These policies are the driving force behind the 2018 California State Rail Plan, which establishes a long-term vision for prioritizing state rail investment. Just by way of background, California's passenger rail system includes Amtrak National Network long-distance routes, as well as state-supported intercity passenger trains, along with locally supported commuter and urban rail services. Amtrak long-distance routes that serve both California and interstate markets include the California Zephyr, Coast Starlight, Sunset Limited, and Southwest Chief. We greatly value these services, which connect many of California's smaller communities to the rest of the state and nation. Meanwhile, our state-supported routes include the Pacific Surfliner, San Joaquin's, and Capitol Corridor. Together, they make up nearly 20% of Amtrak's entire ridership. I want to point out that California funds and owns most of the equipment used on the 3 state-supported intercity rail routes, which are managed by regional joint powers authorities. California greatly appreciates the $16 billion in the IIJA for Amtrak's national network, which can be used to upgrade California Amtrak stations and other facilities to full ADA compliance. Funds can also be used to rehabilitate and replace old Amtrak-owned fleet and facilities and conduct corridor development activities. Amtrak has also expressed a desire to conduct corridor development, starting with the LA Phoenix Tucson route. Amtrak is supporting efforts by Caltrans, Lausan Rail Corridor Agency, and the Riverside County Transportation Commission to expand service into the Coachella Valley as a supporting project to the broader goal of increasing rail service between California and Arizona. We also appreciate the significant expansion and reform of the federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail program. The new law provides $36 billion, with at least $12 billion available for projects outside the Northeast Corridor. This will boost California's state funding programs, which are investing heavily in corridor expansion to operate more frequent service and extend our corridors. I want to emphasize that federal rail funding provided to California is not just an investment, it's a partnership. Federal funding supports significant state, local, and private rail investments that are already being made throughout the state. As noted in the state rail plan, $20 billion for California rail projects is needed through 2027 and $119 billion through 2040. We have already delivered more than $4.7 billion since 2015 for projects that benefit intercity rail, but only $150 million came from federal sources. State and local rail funding comes from a wide variety of programs, including local sales tax measures, California's biennial state transportation improvement program, the State Rail Assistance Program created by California's landmark SB1, and other competitive programs. Just a few weeks ago, my agency issued a call for projects for the upcoming round of grants from the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, TIRCP. This program funds rail and transit capital projects that reduce GHG emissions, VMT, and congestion. Since 2015, we have awarded $5.8 billion to 73 projects with a total value of over $26 billion. We are also leading the nation in transitioning to zero-emission intercity rail by 2035. Our state budget that was enacted just a few months ago includes $3.9 billion to accelerate the state's zero-emission vehicle goals. And we already have initiatives underway. For example, Caltrans is rolling out renewable diesel to the entire intercity fleet. And we're also going to deploy zero-emission multiple unit train sets using both hydrogen fuel cells and electric batteries. I also want to point out that we are also advancing sustainability goals by supporting privately financed and developed electric high-speed rail. Brightline West is planning to build a high-speed system connecting Las Vegas with both Rancho Cucamonga and Palmdale. Last year, I authorized Caltrans to enter into a lease agreement allowing Brightline West to use state right-of-way along Interstate 15 for high-speed rail service. Finally, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, construction on the nation's first truly high-speed rail project continues to show steady progress. The California High-Speed Rail Authority is advancing construction in the Central Valley, extending to Merced and Bakersfield, and completing environmental work for the entire 500-mile system. Today in the Central Valley, there are 35 different work sites along 119 miles of construction. More than 6,000 jobs have been created. 635 certified small businesses working on the project, including—
Please wrap it up. Please wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Okay, so in closing, we are excited about the future of intercity passenger rail in California and the prospect of expanding services throughout the state, thanks to the IIJA. Thank you again, and I look forward to working with the subcommittee and the administration to make transformative investments that will deliver the next generation of American intercity passenger rail.
Thank you. The witness's time has expired. We'll next hear from Mr. Corbett for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Payne. As always, a pleasure to be with you. And thank you to Vice Chair Strickland, Ranking Member Crawford, and the members of the committee for inviting me to discuss the significance of President Biden's Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, especially as it relates to the critical infrastructure along the Northeast Corridor between Washington, D.C. and Boston. I serve as the president and CEO of New Jersey Transit, but today I'll be speaking mainly in my capacity as co-chair of the Northeast Corridor Commission, where I serve alongside my fellow co-chair, FRA Deputy Administrator Amit Bose, and my good friend and colleague, Stephen Gardner, who is vice chair of the commission, president of Amtrak. It's almost impossible to overstate the importance of this stretch of transportation infrastructure. Not only do the millions of commuters and intercity rail customers rely on it, but to our national economy. Every year, the region served by the Northeast Corridor provides more than 24 million jobs and produces about 20% of the nation's GDP. This historic investment provides a sizable down payment to allow the commission members to rebuild and modernize the Northeast Corridor, to provide better, faster, more frequent, and more reliable service to the millions of commuters and intercity travelers who depend on it every year. And to be clear, the Northeast Corridor Commission, representing each of the 9 NEC states, as well as the District of Columbia, Amtrak, and the U.S. Department of Transportation, is ready to put these investments to work. This summer, the Commission unanimously took a significant step forward towards this goal through the launch of an innovative new plan, Connect NEC 2035, known as C35. C35 is our roadmap for how this generational investment for rail should be invested along the corridor, and it is the most ambitious and transformational reinvestment program in the NEC's history. C35 establishes a detailed and efficient sequencing of infrastructure investments covering over 150 projects, along with a comprehensive renewal program for state of good repair projects, including track, signal, and power systems. The total cost of C35 is currently estimated to be approximately $117 billion over 15 years, with a $100 billion funding gap. The infrastructure bill provides a significant down payment that will leverage progress on this imperative work up and down the corridor. C35 won't simply rebuild the existing Northeast corridor, it will build back better with investments that translate to faster, more frequent, and more reliable commuter and intercity rail service. C35 will allow for the number of daily NEC Amtrak trains to grow by a third and will allow us at New Jersey Transit, for example, to more than double our peak hour service. Travel time will be nearly 30 minutes shorter for Acela riders traveling from Washington to New York and New York to Boston. In my written testimony I have submitted to the committee, I highlighted the Hudson River Tunnel and a number of other projects that NJ Transit is supporting as it relates to C35. So in the interest of time, I won't list them individually now, but it's fair to say that no one knows more painfully than New Jersey about the far-reaching negative impact that prolonged disinvestment can have on a transit system. And similar to what Governor Murphy's unprecedented investment had done for New Jersey and New Jersey Transit over the past 4 years, President Biden's historic investment will do the same for the nation's transportation network, including the entire Northeast corridor. Beyond New Jersey Transit and in projects up and down the Northeast corridor will benefit from this new federal funding. For example, as been touched upon, the nearly 150-year-old Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel, just south of Baltimore's Penn Station, is indeed Amtrak's oldest tunnel, and as touched upon is the aging components that require constant monitoring and maintenance, representing a significant single point of failure that could sever service between Washington and New York. Capacity there will triple, and instead of 30 miles per hour, trains will reach over 100 miles per hour in the new tunnel. Another example is in Connecticut, where Amtrak and its project partners, Connecticut DOT, are working to replace the Connecticut River Bridge between Old Saybrook and Old Lyme, which carries Amtrak and Shoreline East trains. The frequent opening and closing of the 114-year-old bridge over 3,000 times per year puts high demand on its aging components, increasing maintenance costs for Amtrak and reducing reliability for both railway and marine traffic. Full replacement of these existing bridges will increase reliability and allow for increased speeds. All of these projects and many more are expected to create 1.7 million jobs over the 15-year plan and generate billions in economic activity. What we also seize on this opportunity to maximize the contracting opportunities for disadvantaged business enterprises. Mr. Chairman, the NEC Commission is wholly committed to this goal, and our commission policy explicitly states all commission members share the goal of enhancing the participation of DBEs and similar entities. Speak for NJ Transit, our agency boasts the highest DBE goal in the region at nearly 22%. And as co-chair of the NEC Commission, I want to assure you that the commission will prioritize contracting opportunities for DBEs throughout the investment. To be sure, this is an exciting time for the Northeast corridor, but we must be clear-eyed and realistic about the road in front of us. NEC agencies, including NJ Transit, will need time to build the organizational capacity to advance project pipeline and deliver projects, including detailed planning and engineering required.
Please wrap up.
Sure, we will certainly work with our partners in labor and the private sector to hire and train the significant new workforce. To wrap up, I want to thank President Biden for his commitment to investing in the nation's transportation infrastructure, particularly in Northeast corridor, and also want to thank New Jersey's entire congressional delegation for their leadership and support. And lastly, I would like to thank Chair DeFazio as well for his tremendous support and bringing us to this point, and certainly look forward to working with him for the rest of the year. So again, thank you, Chairman Payne, Vice Chair Strickland, and Member Crawford for your time today.
Thank you. The witness's time has expired. We will next hear from Ms. White for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman DeFazio, Chairman Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, and members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing to discuss passenger rail is an integral part of our national transportation system. My name is Julie White. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, with oversight of our rail, aviation, ferry, public transit, bicycle, and pedestrian divisions. I'm also the chair of the Southeast Corridor Commission, a regional partnership made up of North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida. The Southeast Corridor Commission is leading the effort to connect states across the Southeast megaregion through passenger and freight rail. The Commission is charged with developing the Southeast Regional Rail Plan, reporting on the economic benefits of rail along the corridor, creating an implementation plan, and prioritizing major projects. The goal of this effort is to improve the mutual cooperation and planning between states and stakeholders to position the corridor to receive direct federal funding. Our states work together to advance our shared vision for high-performance rail throughout the Southeast, because we have a shared understanding of the power of rail to connect our states and our communities. And equally important, we know that rail infrastructure investments create economic growth and opportunity. The Commission is now looking to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to provide the federal funding needed to continue our work together and to advance our plans to construction, as well as initial operating support. North Carolina and Virginia, with the support of the FRA, Amtrak, and our freight rail partners, have a long history of partnership to advance development of the S-Line from Raleigh to Richmond. As you can see on the map, the S-Line, highlighted in yellow, is the key connection from the Northeast Corridor to the Southeast. I would note for you that the blue line to the right of the S-Line is CSX's main freight line. Therefore, advancing passenger rail on the S-Line rather than the freight line ensures that freight traffic is not impeded by passenger growth. This is a key example of the way we work to identify win-win opportunities that benefit both freight and passenger rail. The planning for this corridor dates back decades and has progressed through federal and state investment. North Carolina and Virginia have already completed the necessary environmental work for the entire Raleigh to Richmond corridor, and we are working toward detailed design. This step will pave the way for construction, including all new track and signal systems and safety projects that will have immediate benefits through roadway crossing grade separations and closures. Virginia has acquired the S-Line within their state, and North Carolina, through an FRA grant, is actively working with CSX, our strong partner, to acquire the corridor in our state. The S-Line will be developed as a high-performance passenger rail line that will improve rail travel times by over an hour, connect urban and rural communities, and offer freight benefits by not growing passenger rail on high-volume freight lines. We are jointly working to determine how to advance this critical link on the Eastern Seaboard through the IIJA. We have defined incremental development phases, both large and small, to be ready to maximize federal dollars to construct and implement new passenger rail service. We are also examining how we can improve project delivery to get the line into service faster. Often it takes too long to build infrastructure, and innovative project delivery is a must. The North Carolina DOT has a robust engagement process with our DVE partners and are working with our Office of Civil Rights to host webinars focused on the infrastructure bill and how small minority-owned firms can be prepared and ready to take advantage of the resulting construction that will come. The one we had yesterday was very well attended, and we look forward to doing more in the future. What I hope you take away from my testimony today is that the Southeast Corridor Commission and the state of North Carolina are committed to continuing our strong partnership with Congress, the FRA, the freight railroads, Amtrak, and others to expand passenger and freight rail in the Southeast. The IIJA is a historic opportunity to build upon our joint work to date, connect urban and rural communities, and provide our residents with additional mobility and access to jobs in the economy. We thank Congress for the bold action and the IIJA level of investment in rail, and we stand ready with our partners to expand our nation's high-performance passenger rail systems. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee.
Thank you very much. And now we will hear from Ms. DeMartina.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, and members of this esteemed subcommittee. My name is Donna DiMartino, and I'm the Managing Director of the Lausanne Rail Corridor Agency, and I'm honored to join you here today. It is also a pleasure to join Secretary Kim this morning. We appreciate his leadership and the strong working relationship we maintain with the California State Transportation Agency as we work together to plan, implement, and fund state-supported intercity passenger rail services. The historic IIJA will be an important part of our future. I would like to mention the other two California state-supported intercity passenger rail agencies, the Capital Corridor and the San Joaquins. We are proud that our three services all rank in the top 6 Amtrak state-supported ridership. The Lausanne Rail Corridor Agency is a joint powers authority comprised of rail owners, operators, and planning agencies along the Lausanne Rail Corridor. As a joint powers authority, we empower local stakeholders, taxpayers, and communities with greater control and oversight of their intercity passenger rail services. The Surfliner provides service between San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Luis Obispo, and is the highest ridership state-supported service in the United States. Pre-pandemic, the Pacific Surfliner carried over 2.75 million passengers, and the Lausanne Corridor ranked as the second busiest intercity passenger rail corridor in the United States, behind only the Northeast Corridor. As a state-supported service, our operations are funded by the state of California, and we make payments to Amtrak, the operator of our services, as governed by the Section 209 cost formula. We are very proud of our outstanding fare box recovery rate of over 75%, but we still receive nearly $35 million in operating support from the state of California. Many of the most prominent corridors and routes mentioned for potential expansion or return to service are under 750 miles, which means they would also be state-supported services. As a successful state-supported route, I would like to share some recommendations and lessons learned. States must prioritize and build relationships with railroad stakeholders, particularly freight railroads and railway labor. Sustained state and local political support is essential to growing intercity passenger rail services. Comprehensive long-range planning is important to ensure the sustainability of our operations. Transparent and traceable cost information is necessary to inform investment and operating decisions. And finally, ensuring state services remain innovative and nimble will help with cost containment and positive passenger experiences. The Surfliner operates over one of the busiest and most complex rail corridors in the country. The Lausanne Rail Corridor hosts up to 220 commuter, freight, and intercity trains per day. In addition to the Surfliner, the corridor hosts BNSF and Union Pacific freight trains and Metrolink and Coaster commuter trains. We take pride in our planning efforts with our partners. We recently completed the Lausanne Rail Corridor Optimization Study that will maximize our passenger rail service potential in advance of the 2028 Olympic Games to be held in Los Angeles. BNSF's pathing study played an integral part in helping to inform our current and future service enhancements and operations as a part of this study. In addition to the close operational coordination, we work closely with our partners to move our capital programs forward. While we enjoy a strong relationship with our host railroads, these relationships take time to develop, so I strongly recommend that states begin coordinating route planning and capital projects sooner rather than later. In addition to these strong partnerships, sustained state and local political support is essential to growing intercity rail services. We are proud and grateful for California's tremendous investments in intercity passenger rail service. Since 2015, the state has invested over $4 billion in improving passenger rail infrastructure and rolling stock, guided by our comprehensive 2018 state rail plan. Given our state's continued operating subsidies and capital commitments, we need clear cost information to inform our investment and operating decisions. Unfortunately, we have found the current state Amtrak cost formula to be complicated, opaque, and not necessarily tied to services we receive. Costs can increase in ways that are not intuitive or easily explained. However, we are hopeful that the reforms in the IIJA and the required cost model update will yield tangible results and provide states more transparent cost and accounting information. We look forward to working with Amtrak and this committee during the process. State-supported routes have the flexibility to provide innovative passenger rail experiences and to align our services to the services we receive. Ensuring states maintain the ability to be nimble will enhance service and innovation across passenger rail services. I appreciate the opportunity to join you this morning, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you to the witness. Next, we have Mr. Ross for 5 minutes.
Good morning. I'm Knox Ross. I'm Chairman of the Southern Rail Commission. Thank you, Chairman DeFazio, Chairman Payne, Ranking Member Crawford, and the members of the committee for allowing me to testify today. I want to simply say thank you because we've waited for over 50 years for long-term funding in support of a robust passenger rail system. And now we have it through the bipartisan infrastructure law. This committee and its corresponding Senate committee have delivered on the promise and power of passenger rail with an extraordinary investment. I speak for many when I say I'm so pleased to see Amtrak's mission is now focused on serving the entire nation, that its board of directors will be more balanced to include perspectives from all of those served by Amtrak with a special focus on the value of our long distance trains and the quality of the onboard experience. Thank you again for all your hard work and that of your staff. In addition to being the chairman of the Southern Rail Commission, I'm also a certified public accountant, a former mayor. I served on Amtrak's Mayor's Advisory Council, and I've served on various regional transportation committees within Mississippi. As I've traveled across this country on Amtrak and met with local leaders and citizens from all walks of life, I have heard a shared vision of how we can build our nation's passenger rail system. Whether in Montana, Florida, Illinois, Washington, Maine, or my native South, there's a national aspiration for well-run passenger rail service throughout our country. That includes a hunger for establishing more multi-state commissions like the SRC, which you authorized and funded in the infrastructure law. The Southern Rail Commission, made up of commissioners from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, was established by Congress in 1982 and promotes safe and efficient freight and passenger rail service. The SRC has engaged local decision makers, national stakeholders, many of you and your staff, and has been successful in securing resources at the federal, state, and local level to make our goals a reality. Similar to the great work that you had to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law, there has been a bipartisan effort along the Gulf Coast with Democratic and Republican mayors, governors, legislators in support of restoring passenger rail in our region. In addition to the significant commitments by our states, local governments have committed nearly $1 million for station improvements and accessibility improvements, all while recovering from natural and man-made disasters. We applied for CRISI funding for capital infrastructure needs and were awarded $33 million by the Trump administration with a local match of $33 million from our respected states. This funding will help reestablish service between New Orleans and Mobile, and we are on the cusp of realizing that dream with service expected to begin in 2022. In addition to our focus on the Gulf, there's great support to establish passenger rail service from New Orleans to Baton Rouge and from Atlanta to Dallas-Fort Worth by splitting the Crescent service at Meridian, Mississippi. To accomplish these things, working with local, state, Amtrak, and host railroads, we intend to leverage the capital money provided within the bipartisan infrastructure law from CRISI, local and regional partnership project assistance programs, and the federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail grants, and operating support from the Restoration Enhancement Grants and the Interstate Rail Commission's program. We know that investment in rail has to address both freight and passenger rail. To this end, we have a 15-year history of endeavoring to work with freights to restore Gulf service, the impasse of which is being heard by the Surface Transportation Board at present. We are currently working closely with Canadian Pacific on the services I've previously mentioned, and we have found a willing and able partner. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a CPA, and return on investment is important to me. A study conducted by the Trent Lott Center for Economic Development at the University of Southern Mississippi found that these investments in restoring passenger rail to the Gulf could yield a 15-to-1 return for Mississippi in economic development and job creation. Distinguished members, this is not about nostalgia for the SRC. This is about the future of a vibrant region in the South. We have seen what passenger rail will do for people across the country, and we believe in its promise of what it will do for our home states. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I'd like to thank the witness for his testimony. I will now move to questions. And now move on to member questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I will start by recognizing myself. If I can find them. Okay. Mr. Gardner, one of the great achievements of the IIJA is that it provides the single largest investment in intercity passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak. Can you elaborate on more on the how the funding provided to Amtrak will benefit the American people?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the dollars that come directly to Amtrak out of the $66 billion in the IIJA are $22 billion. And those dollars are really focused on rebuilding and replacing our outmoded assets, really bringing our system up to a state of good repair. And $16 billion are focused on our national network, our 46-state network serving our long distance and state-supported routes, and another 6 for the Northeast Corridor. These investments are going to mean modern equipment, upgraded stations that are accessible, and more reliable service and better service for communities and passengers around the nation. Additionally, the dollars that come to the Federal Railroad Administration through the Federal State Partnership Grant Program really offer that opportunity for growing and expanding and improving the network to better align today's services with the population of the United States, which has grown 120 million people since we were formed 50 years ago, but for which we often don't serve with anywhere near the sufficient level of service. So we're really looking forward to working with great state partners like the witnesses here today and others to find opportunities with the FRA to invest and deliver both meaningful improvements to service, great job opportunities for well-paying, long-standing union job opportunities, and real investment in the manufacturing and supply capability of the United States, which will produce, again, huge economic dividends and opportunity across the nation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Corbett and Ms. White, for this money to revolutionize the rail in the country, we will need everyone to get along and do their part. So, Mr. Corbett, how long did it take everyone to get along on the Northeast Corridor Commission? And does each successive planning document where you're getting more and more specific about the project sequencing easier over time?
Yeah, Chairman, it's a very poignant question. I think just as Congress faced hundreds of years ago, you either hang jointly or you hang severally, and I think that was certainly in the 4 years that I've been with the commission. I think we really focused on cooperating, and I think even when it was the Pennsylvania Railroad, when it was all under one house, there was always the tension between the intercity and the commuter division. I think that kind of collaborative spirit, certainly partnering with Stephen and the other members, to be very frank and open about the challenges. And even within the railroad, you have a tension between the people who have to operate the railroad every day and the ones who have to execute the capital projects. And that's a natural tension. And I think we put it all out on the table, said, okay, how do we balance making sure we maintain good, reliable service, but also making these big capital projects? And the devil being in the details. The C-35 really, last few years, all of us worked hard to really drill down on, making sure that when this opportunity came, we would be prepared.
Thank you. Ms. White, how do the corridors, how do the Southern East Corridor Commission challenges and experiences compare to the Northeast Corridor?
It's a wonderful question, Mr. Chairman. A couple of years ago, I actually attended an NEC meeting. So we have very much tried to learn from the NEC. We are in our infancy, only being a few years old. So I'm pleased to share that our states have a really great working relationship to date. Our cooperation in doing our 3 planning studies has been excellent. We are working hard in COVID to build those relationships and look forward to actually getting together more in person. So much of, I think, cooperative working relationships is the key to success. So I think to date, we've done everything we've done unanimously and very cooperatively. And with this historic investment, we see an opportunity to continue that work together.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. I'll now go to Mr. Crawford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question is for Ms. DiMartino. Last month, Amtrak received record funding for its network. This comes after it experienced historic losses in revenue and ridership during COVID-19. How can Amtrak use this historic funding to strengthen its existing system, including by bringing back riders and through working with state-supported routes to improve service?
Thank you for the question. We're optimistic that we'll be able to work with Amtrak to improve services, to increase services, to provide additional assets and support for our customers along our corridor. We are looking forward to also improving the cost formula that we mentioned earlier, that's been mentioned several times, so that we're actually able to identify the levers for the costs that we have and to be able to make decisions about future services. During the pandemic, we had to reduce our services by 50% and our ridership went down to 5%. I'm really happy to report that our ridership is booming. We've experienced great increases in ridership. We look forward to working with Amtrak to even further increase our services and improve that ridership and meet the demand that we see along our corridor.
How can Amtrak improve its relationship with state-supported routes, including through sharing costs with the states?
I think that's the biggest thing, sharing costs, being able to identify what things actually cost so that we can make decisions. Again, we've been looking for the levers. We need to understand what the station costs are, what our costs are. We definitely want to pay our share for the services that we're providing, but sometimes the costs are opaque. I used that word earlier because we don't understand. There are some national costs that are built into the state cost, and it makes it difficult for us to make decisions. A few examples are cost for police services and station cost. We share those with some long distance routes. So again, the cost improvement or the cost formula improvement will be a very important part of improving the relationship, improving our ability to provide cost-effective services and to be accountable to the people we serve.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate the responses. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Okay, I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Malinowski, for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from New Jersey and the chairman. Thank you so much. So I want to direct a question to Mr. Gardner and Mr. Corbett, and start by acknowledging the tremendous progress that we have made on the Gateway project, which, as you both know, is extraordinarily important to the people of New Jersey and New York, but also to the entire economy of the Eastern Seaboard. So in January of this year, as you know, we executed the full funding grant agreement to secure $800 million to replace the Portal North Bridge, an important part of the project. There's a contract that's been signed with a firm to start building it. On the Hudson River Tunnel, we've secured the long-delayed environmental impact statement. Just last week, the Army Corps issued its environmental permit for the tunnel. We hosted President Biden for a groundbreaking for the Portal Bridge. Secretary Buttigieg has made multiple visits to look at the project. And of course, we have just passed and sent to the president enacting the most transformative investment in America's infrastructure in generations, a law that will at last fund the Gateway project and so much more. We've obviously got a lot more work to do, but hopefully soon we're going to be shifting into the construction phase for the tunnel, something that would have seemed out of reach just a couple of years ago. But just as I pushed hard, including in the last administration, to get us to this point, I'm going to push just as hard to get things built faster without compromising on safety. The current plan, as I understand it, for the bridge, for the Portal Bridge, has final completion slated for July 2027. That's quite a ways down the road. And for the tunnel, if we're able to get the financing plan in place in 2022, what I've heard is talk about completion not until 2035. Now, I get that projects this complicated don't get built overnight. But you will not be surprised that my constituents will not be happy if they have to wait until 2035 to get this project done. So my question to you both is, what are you doing to expedite those timelines, and what can we do from Washington to help make that happen?
Stephen, maybe I could just touch on Portal Bridge and then turn the tunnel over to you. But Congressman, thanks as always for your support. Obviously, you've been very active in helping not just the Northeast Corridor and Gateway, but New Jersey Transit. So very much appreciated. I think one of the key things we touched on, the cooperation between Amtrak and, in this case, New Jersey Transit. We've had on Portal Bridge, we had excellent cooperation 4 years ago. I think it's no secret we were at war with each other. And now, if you look at the project development agreement that we have for the execution of the delivery of Portal Bridge, that's a really historic shift in where Amtrak and New Jersey Transit as partners are put this out in a way that allows us for shared savings to be realized with the contractor, and bonus payments for being able to meet or exceed milestone deadlines, so that we're able to move the project along, and there's an incentive to do that quicker. There is with US DOT, we're working with the new administration, both with FTA, FRA on harmonization. There's some differences for historic reasons. Some may even require legislative fixes, but between FTA policies and FRA policies. So that harmonization effort should also be able to help move projects through some of those bureaucratic hurdles quicker. But Stephen, if you want to talk about the tunnel, turn over to you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Congressman, for your leadership. As Kevin recognized, you've been a huge advocate for this project. We deeply appreciate it. We agree with you that moving as fast as we can on the Hudson Tunnel project is imperative, and I know that Kevin shares that view as well. And I want to assure you, we are already taking steps to support that. In fact, Amtrak recently purchased a vital piece of property in Manhattan, which will be the receiving site for the tunnel pouring machine, and ultimately the ventilation shaft area for the new tunnel. We are working to advance the next phase and the final phase of the Hudson Yards concrete casing, which is creates the core tunnel connection into Penn Station, and working cooperatively with New Jersey and New York on the strategy to deliver this project. So we are all in on trying to get this done as soon as we can. As you know, the project really has two phases. One is building the new tunnels, and the second phase is really rehabilitating the existing North River tubes. In the interim, we are advancing a North River tube stabilization program to make sure we have reliable service during this period of construction. But our aim is to get those new tubes built as soon as we can, because they will create immediate reliability improvements. And then ultimately, as we expand other aspects under the Gateway program, create that additional capacity so that New Jersey Transit and Kevin's organization can really substantially grow, and Amtrak can grow as well.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. We will next have my good friend, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate you being here today, and I appreciate this hearing. Very important issues we're talking about when it comes to public transportation. My first question is for Secretary Kim. As we look to the future of high-speed rail, I really hope our transportation agencies engage more with the private sector. I've been on this committee now for 9 years, and one of the first pieces of legislation that we got put into a major bill was in regards to public-private partnerships. And with that in mind, how does Brightline West fit into the California high-speed rail system at this point?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Davis. As mentioned in my testimony, we have been working very closely and cooperatively with Brightline West to help advance their project from Las Vegas to Southern California. I directed Caltrans to enter into an MOU to enable Brightline West to utilize the median of Interstate 15 to build their high-speed system from Vegas to Southern California. And so we are working very cooperatively with them. At some point, they will connect to the California high-speed rail system in Southern California. And so there is synergy between what we're doing on the public sector side and what they are doing on the private sector side. A lot of good cooperation and communication with Brightline West, and we expect that to continue.
Well, great. Thank you for your response. I can imagine when it's done, there will be a lot of my fellow Raider fans decked out coming from California to Vegas to see them play. Mr. Gardner, I mentioned Brightline in my question, as you know, to Secretary Kim, and the Brightline model allows for positive and free cash flow. And Amtrak projects require significant federal grants, federal subsidies, and state subsidies. Are there ways to partner with private sector companies like Brightline who are working to take on ridership and construction risk for the projects in front of them?
Thank you, Congressman. And yes, we are open to partnerships and in fact have developed a good rapport with a number of entities looking to develop new services and have a relationship, for instance, with Texas Central that looks to make sure we can create synergy between their projects and also offer our support where we can. So we really believe in growth of this mode. The nation needs more intercity passenger rail service to meet its goals, and we want to enable that where we can bring the resources and assets we have and find partnerships that can allow service to grow.
Well, we appreciate your comments and would encourage you to look at more of this public-private sector partnership, like I just mentioned, with companies like Brightline, just for an example, as we possibly move into a majority. We are going to be looking at opportunities to make sure that we see opportunities like this continue to move forward. While I have you, Mr. Gardner, I just wanted to relay something. I'm really supportive of the St. Louis to Chicago high-speed rail corridor in my home state of Illinois that goes right through my district. We're going to continue to work together to ensure that we try to do everything we can to increase ridership along that corridor. But I had one of my folks witness something the other day that kind of disturbed me a little bit and I think discourages ridership. We fly a lot from our districts to DC, and sometimes you walk on the plane, your mask may be falling down a little bit, and the flight attendant will say, "Hey, could you raise that up?" Just the other day, before one of the passenger trains took off from Bloomington, Illinois, towards Chicago, it was witnessed by somebody very close to me that a couple of passengers were carrying their luggage on, their mask fell down. They were told to step outside. They were told to step off the train. And then they weren't let on the train without any warning whatsoever. I mean, look, I get following the rules, but at some point, we've got to make sure we don't have a system of mask vigilantes who stop people from utilizing a service we're trying to encourage more ridership on. So I would encourage you, in this one case, I know hopefully it's not something that happens on a regular basis, but I would appreciate you relaying to your employees that it's imperative that we try to get people to cooperate, but at the same time, those who are not being troublesome should be offered a chance to get back on the train after following the directions. So, have any comments on that?
Well, sir, I absolutely agree. That's not consistent with our policy, and we'll certainly look into that event. Absolutely, we of course encourage through lots of communication, compliance with the mask requirements, and then on board if we encounter situations or in our stations where people aren't complying, we should politely ask them to comply and have a good dialogue to make sure they understand the requirements and are given opportunities to comply. So that is the appropriate way to handle our guests, our customers, and that's not consistent at all with how I expect and anyone on Amtrak expects us to handle this important safety requirement.
And my team will get with you on the exact train and the time, and hopefully you can look into it.
Please.
But I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Now we have Mr. Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I want to pick up actually just where my good friend from Illinois left off. Mr. Gardner, great to see you. We've talked about this before, but as we all know from flying regularly in the United States, when you get off a plane, the crew usually thanks you. Certainly the flight attendants, often the pilots too. Why does that never happen on Amtrak?
Well, Congressman, good to see you. I can say that on certainly many trips that I'm on, we do have crew that both welcomes and thanks folks for their patronage. Certainly, it is an important thing that we have all of our employees recognize the privilege we have to serve them and are conveying both that hospitality and thanks. In general, our conductors, our personnel get great marks. In fact, the highest marks we have in our customer satisfaction surveys, of which we do thousands and thousands a day and very robust data, come for the friendliness and helpfulness of conductors. So in general, we have very good feedback from our customers, but it is always something we have to work on. And I appreciate you raising it. I completely concur that we want people to feel appreciated and welcomed and
Look, I want more people to ride trains, and I just want to help you get there. I've never seen an engineer thank anyone for being on a train. The pilots do that regularly. Conductors rarely actually stand at the door and thank you for riding, although they make an announcement before you get off. These are just some things I think to think about. There are other things we can do to make people ride trains more. In Europe, track speeds are standard at about 100 miles an hour on routes that are not high speed. Commuter trains in the UK, which is sort of notorious in Europe for not having great speeds on its railways, are 125. I just actually, Kevin, tell us what you're doing to increase speeds. Why are we still going 79 miles per hour in America, which is basically a speed limit set in 1947?
Congressman, as I think you realize the history of the, particularly in the Northeast corridor, a legacy of a lot of the private railroads, say in New Jersey Transit's case, we had the Erie, the Lackawanna, the Pennsylvania. So you have this infrastructure in the most densely populated part of the country. And when you look at, we are still the backbone of our system is really from the 19th century. So
that's right. But now we have PTC. So what is preventing us from going above 79 miles per hour now that we have PTC?
Yeah, it's basically it's a complex issue, but simply that you have the commuter rails running on the same tracks on the Northeast corridor, and also in some areas freight trains. So they go at different spots. They come in and out, on local stops versus the intercity that may be going, say, straight from Philadelphia to New York.
I think we need a better answer to this, because there's a 1947 law that dictates 79 miles per hour that should not apply now that we have PTC. So if you could take that for the record, I would really appreciate it. Can you also tell me, Kevin, how much would it increase capacity in Penn Station if your commuter trains ran through to Long Island and vice versa? So New Jersey Transit and Long Island Railroad were not turning trains around in a through station.
Congressman, for the through running at New York, that definitely just as any station, rather than having to stop, switch the head then and go back. We are working with Amtrak on the expansion, looking at the various options of how many trains we could run through and putting that. So we'll have to get back to you when that study is completed, but it will definitely shorten the time of turnarounds. And that's the idea, is trying to maximize.
We looked in Boston, and it increased capacity at South Station by about 8 times. Which is massive. It's significant for a station as congested as Penn. I hope you're looking at that and considering that as you look at these gateway tunnel opportunities as well. Stephen, just back to you real quick. Mr. Davis was talking about the advantages of private capital. Obviously, private capital is a good thing. Many infrastructure, many high-speed rail projects around the world benefit from private capital. There's a lot of private capital proposed for investment in the Dallas to Houston corridor that you mentioned. How are you going to be sure to leverage that I'm a bit concerned that Amtrak seems to plan to build a publicly funded route right parallel to the Texas Central High-Speed Rail Plan.
Thanks, Congressman. So actually, our initial proposal is to invest in the other pieces of the legs there in the Texas Triangle to pursue service that can create connectivity with Texas Central and serve the other parts of Texas and create really an integrated network. As you know, really every developed nation in the world has a combination of intercity, commuter, and high-speed service that work together in a network to be able to serve the many different markets that exist and create really that overall value of mobility by providing many different types of trips from many different parts. So we really think about advancing the Texas corridors together with Texas Central, focusing on those areas that could create feeder and connectivity to the high-speed service, recognizing the high-speed service, of course, won't serve many local communities. It'll make a few stops in order to achieve those high speeds and those trip times. And over time, we think there is opportunity for sort of infill together with the high-speed service, but really our focus is on the other two legs of the triangle as initial starts in connecting with the Texas Central.
Well, I fully support that approach. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, gentlemen's time has expired. I will now have Mr. Weber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions also are going to be for Mr. Gardner. Ms. Gardner, I think in your comments, you mentioned a Gulf Coast line. Of course, I have the Gulf Coast of Texas, 3 coastal counties. Were you referring to something along those lines, pun intended, or was this something more easterly?
Thank you, Congressman Weber. So I was referring to the Gulf Coast service that we've been planning with the Southern Rail Commission and with Mr. Ross, who's here today, between Mobile and New Orleans. However, we do see opportunity, as Mr. Ross mentioned, we have opportunities elsewhere in the region, but that service has been planned for many years now, and hopefully we'll be able to start soon. I think, as Mr. Ross said, really does create sort of an initial great opportunity to demonstrate the opportunity for more service in the South.
Well, thanks. I'm also interested, as you mentioned, the triangle there in Texas, high-speed rail that has been being talked about. I'm interested, you mentioned, I think, Amtrak coming in and I forget how you said it, partnering, I think it was with Congressman Moulton's dialogue into the different areas of the corridor. But I'd like for you to reach out to my office and kind of give us an update on exactly what you plan to do in that regard. I don't need it right here today. I need to move on to my next question. I know that Amtrak has had some ridership losses, and of course, I appreciated Mr. Davis's question and Seth Moulton's too, for that matter, because it raises issues. We want to be, the old quote used to be, the friendly skies of United. Well, maybe we need the friendly snacks of Amtrak's. Maybe we all need to pass out peanuts or pretzels or whatever, kind of like some of the airlines do, and thank the riders. That would probably help a little bit. Do you have plans to bolster your ridership? Because I know there's been some losses.
Yeah, great question. And as you mentioned, we did go down to about 4% of our demand here last year in April. And we've already come back to about 70%, 75%, depending in many of our markets. So we have been growing back steadily. Obviously, the coronavirus continues to present some challenges, but we are hopeful that we're going to continue that trend. One of the things that we really focused on during this time is to build better communication technology and connectivity for our passengers, make their trip easier, and also focus on our pricing and new opportunities to get more riders. And I'm really encouraged that we've been able to increase ridership for new riders, folks who have never ridden the train before, by about 500,000 folks a month. So this is a whole new cadre of folks who are coming to the train for the first time and growing. And so we also have restored and improved our dining service on our Western trains. We're improving service across the network and upgrading our fleet. So I think all of these things are coming together to provide a better service and really encourage folks to come back. And those new riders are key because we don't know how long it'll take before business travel has returned. So a lot of new leisure rider is important.
Well, I want to make one observation, then I have a question. Of course, well, I'll do the question first. Partnering up with the rail lines now, do some studies to see moduling studies to see if services on those lines are supported by capacity and schedule modeling studies. Have you been able to partner up with any of the railroads to do those studies to see about expanding capacity on those lines?
Yes, absolutely. We've been working very closely with a variety of host railroads on opportunities to expand, notably Burlington Northern Santa Fe and our work to expand the Heartland Flyer service between Texas and Oklahoma and potentially extend that north to Wichita and Newton. In Colorado along the Front Range, also with BNSF, to look at opportunities there. With Canadian Pacific, we've been having really good conversations about launching a new service between the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, and Chicago. Similarly, I think there's opportunities for that Baton Rouge to New Orleans service that Mr. Ross mentioned. And we have a strong modeling capability and service planning. The Northeast Corridor handles 2,200 trains a day in normal times. We model that interaction of 2,000 freight trains, about 130 Amtrak trains, and 70 freight trains a day. And so we know how to build a schedule that works and have great cooperation with a number of our host railroads to do that. We're going to work together with them to find those win-wins that
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have left?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you for that. I'll yield back.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Cohen. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you and Ranking Member Crawford holding this important hearing. I am a big fan of Amtrak, a big fan of rail transportation. And we've heard today about Intercity passenger rail service and how it will reduce the carbon footprint, which is so important right now, reduce congestion, which is returning to pre-pandemic levels, and create better job opportunities and access to affordable and equitable housing opportunities. For instance, weekend after this, I'm planning to go to Nashville to see the University of Memphis play Tennessee in basketball. It's a morning game. And it would be so wonderful if we had a train from Memphis to Nashville that I could ride rather than having to rent a car, go on the I-40, Dodge, and be dodged by large trailer trucks, cabs and all that stuff, and hopefully make it alive. It'd be much better with a train. That would be wonderful. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has for the first time dedicated reliable federal support for states and entities seeking to improve and expand this intercity passenger rail service. I love Amtrak. I go to Washington to New York and Washington to Baltimore and all those, but it'd be nice to get it more in the country, deeper into the country, and where there are people that would use rail if possible, like Memphis to Nashville, which this will be a repeated theme through my remarks. Many metro areas have little or no access to passenger rail service. Memphis is the only major city served in our state, and it goes to Chicago and to New Orleans, and that's been there for years. The city of New Orleans, the former Panama Limited trains, and we have a lot of people that go to Chicago and go to New Orleans on the train, but nobody goes from Memphis to Nashville, which would be important and good. I introduced the Interstate Rail Compacts Advancement Act, which would create multi-state regional passenger commissions, such as the successful Southern Rail Commission, to promote regional coordination and sustain a passenger rail service across America. It was included in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, so it's law, and it establishes a competitive grant program to provide financial assistance. We want to incentivize states to create these multi-state rail commissions, which would help regional collaboration to get passenger rail service and provide these essential connections to jobs. Ford just announced a $5.6 billion investment at the Memphis Regional Mega Site, which is about 50-60 miles out of Memphis in West Tennessee, called Blue Oval City. They're going to build electric vehicles and battery manufacturing plant there. It's the largest investment ever in Tennessee, and create 5,800 jobs. and expanded passenger rail service between Memphis and Nashville could take residents to and from Blue Oval City to have those jobs and make it easier for them to get those high paid, desirable jobs. Mr. Knox Ross, Mississippi Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Ross. As the chairman of the oldest rail commission in the country, can you speak quickly, because my time is limited, to how the creation of these multi-state passenger rail commissions could be helpful in expanding service in Tennessee?
Yes, sir. We can talk specifically about Memphis to Nashville.
Good.
The three-state compact, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. We work on projects both among our three states and within our three states. One of the example we've mentioned is Baton Rouge to New Orleans, wholly within Louisiana. And we all wholeheartedly support that and work on that. The same thing would be if the state of Tennessee joined the Southern Rail Commission, then we could begin working with the host railroad, working with Amtrak to look and see what the possibilities are, what the capacity constraints are, what the potential ridership would be between Nashville and Memphis. And on the surface, that sounds like a great service and one we should definitely look at. But the SRC allows us to do that.
That's a great idea for Tennessee to join with the Southern group and just add to it rather than trying to create their own.
That's right.
The governor would need to initiate that, I presume?
Yes, sir. The governor, the legislatures of Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana would have to vote to invite the state of Tennessee. Then the legislature of the state of Tennessee would have to vote to join.
Well, I guess that could happen.
I think it can happen. It's been pretty simple. But I think the main thing about that type of project is that having something like the Southern Rail Commission, it works across administrations. We've been working on our Gulf.
Let me switch real quick, Mr. Ross. I appreciate it, but my time's about out. I got 30 seconds. Mr. Gardner, and Amtrak's 2035 plan, they had several routes, including Nashville to Chattanooga to Atlanta. But they don't have Memphis to Nashville in there. Why was Memphis to Nashville route, was it considered? And if so, why wasn't it included?
Thank you, Congressman. Our proposal here is really illustrative of the type of service that we think can make sense. Having worked as a young staffer for the House member from Nashville, I know for sure that route between Nashville and Memphis could be very important. We think the Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta route is the sort of first one out of the gate because of some of the opportunities there, but we are willing to talk to your office further. Of course, the FRA is going to make the decisions about the corridor development plan, but we're very bullish on opportunities for Tennessee, both to the north from Nashville, to the west, and to the south and east.
Well, thank you very much, but I would like to concentrate on what you've already got, which is Memphis, a great route. If the people from Nashville could go to Memphis, they could then go to New Orleans. Everybody wants to go to New Orleans, and next everybody wants to go to Memphis. Atlanta, nah.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Next, we will have my good friend, the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Mr. Gardner, I want to come your way here for a little bit. Now, I personally have supported Amtrak, and think it's important that we do the best we can to have that type of rail service around our country. It makes great sense in the Northeast corridor there. And I don't know how close it comes to break even and such. And of course, on the West Coast, we've got one of the nicest routes in the world going down along the coast, but it's, you come back to cost effectiveness, that's a different question. So what we're looking at here indeed is approximately $75 billion investment. And at the height of our economy, before we had all the COVID business here, Amtrak travel consisted of about 0.1% of miles that riders are using in this country versus other modes. So that's kind of a tough number. So we'll be looking at that as we go along here. What I want to ask though too is on the expansion of this new equipment and such that would be in this investment. Where will the equipment be built? We talk a lot about my colleague from California, Mr. Garamendi, build it in the U.S. Can we count on this equipment being built in the United States?
Thank you for that question. And yes, our investments in fleet will be built domestically. In fact, we've recently placed an order with Siemens from California to build over 83 trains with options for over 100 more. Those will be built there in Sacramento. Additionally, we have our current new Acela that's under construction, and that has got 95% of its parts and it's all of its constructions here in the United States. So we are subject, of course, to Buy America rules, and the IIJA makes that clear for the grant dollars.
Okay, I'm sorry, time keeps flying. So, so we can expect to not see a bunch of stuff come from China rail cars, China, et cetera.
Well, we will have an open procurement process for additional fleet, but that fleet requirement will be very clearly established as being built in America and subject to the Buy America requirements. So,
okay, I'll accept that answer. So for now, talk to me a little bit about and I think Mr. Moulton was talking about the speed with which conventional tracks, non-high-speed rail tracks, we're stuck at 79 miles an hour. Doesn't Acela have the ability to go 120? Does it do much 120 miles per hour? Isn't that kind of the maximum number for conventional type trains on conventional high-grade tracks?
So Acela, our new Acela service, actually our trains will be capable of 186 miles an hour. They'll operate at 160 miles an hour on the Northeast Corridor.
Is that a conventional train or is that a dedicated high-speed?
That's a high-speed train. It does share these tracks with conventional service. But outside the Northeast Corridor, the sort of practical top speed in many corridors is about 110 miles an hour. As Congressman Moulton mentioned, 79 is built around an old train control requirement. With PTC, we can get higher speeds, 90, 110, but you do have to address a number of infrastructure pieces, particularly the grade crossing systems and the signal systems.
So you can run a higher speed train on a conventional track than 79 if the track's in good repair. You can go 120, right?
Absolutely. We have a 110 mile an hour service in Michigan already today, sir, on the infrastructure we own and the infrastructure owned by the state of Michigan. And we're moving to 110 miles an hour in the next year in St. Louis to Chicago. So 110
thank you. I'm sorry. Let me shift to Mr. Kim here for a moment. I appreciate it, Mr. Gardner. So in California, we have a big push towards high-speed rail, which was established back in a hearing I was in the state Senate in 2011, that the price had tripled from what the voters were told in 2008. It was going to be $33 billion on the ballot, ended up being $98 billion. They downsized it a little bit, and it's right back up to right about $100 billion now. It's many, many years behind. Right now, the initial phase is going to end in an almond orchard in Bakersfield and go up north to stop at Merced. So we're not even connecting the big cities of SF and LA. So wouldn't we be smart to cut the losses and look at upgrading our conventional tracks that Amtrak runs on now to have capabilities of running 120 miles per hour and not spend all this money and change these routes? We had a hearing yesterday, we were talking about gentrification and expulsion happening in brownfield areas where they're going to be cleaned up. Well, we know this is going to displace people in low-income, disadvantaged areas in California. They're going to run right through it. So why can't we look at upgrading existing rail and running trains 120 miles an hour, especially since high-speed rail doesn't really have the ambition to run entirely from SF to LA without stopping?
Well, the gentleman's time has expired, but I will allow a quick answer from the witness.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. Appreciate the question. Let me just start at a very high level. High-speed rail is absolutely essential to the future of transportation in California. It will completely transform the way we travel, not just in California, but in the US, worldwide. So many of our fellow Americans have traveled abroad to Europe, to Asia. They personally—
Sir, those are talking points. Please just drill down on that, please.
Well, okay, so your question had to do with the schedule, cost, budget, that sort of thing. No question about it. Any mega project of this scope will have its challenges, but I'm here to tell you, if you travel through the Central Valley, you will see visible signs of progress. Progress is being made, 119 miles of construction underway, 6,000 jobs, a lot of viaducts, structures being built, and it's moving forward. And it's also bolstering the economy of the Central Valley, which you know very well is an important regional economy. We are focused on making investments in the Central Valley and to have high-speed rail as a foundational element of the regional economy.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Next on the list, we have Mr. Series, gentleman from New Jersey.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
You can hear me? Well, first of all, thank you very much for the witnesses who've been here today. This is certainly an important hearing. You know, I ride the Eastern Corridor just about every time I go to Washington. And I remember riding the Acela with Senator Frank Lundberg. One of his big complaints was the kind of ride that it was. He says by the time he got to Washington, he was going to lose his kidneys. And I know he used to call Amtrak all the time. I guess my question to you is, look, you have curbs, you have all tracks, you're going through communities. How realistic is, besides the sharing of tracks, how realistic is it that you're going to be able to cut a lot more time between New York and Washington?
Congressman, thank you. I'll take that question. So you're absolutely right. We are dealing with the railroad infrastructure that's over 100 years old in many cases, and there's a lot of work to catch up on. But we do, in the Connect 35 plan that Mr. Corbett described and the Northeast Corridor Commission has been leading, and Kevin's been doing a great job leading that organization. We have a plan that after these investments, we are going to see trip time reductions of about 30 minutes between Washington and New York. And we also, Amtrak and the FRA have looked at further high-speed segments on the corridor. It's going to take a while. We've got to address those old tracks, do a lot of work there. But Amtrak's already ramping up to double our machine capacity to be able to do that work, hiring new folks, and the dollars that you've supported in the IIJA between us and our commuter partners, the FRA, we're going to be able to make these investments and really take some time off the trip. Part of that is fixing some of those curves. A lot of it is redoing the overhead electrical wires, the catenary system. Today, they actually reduce the train speed where we can fix those wires and the railroad straight, we'll be able to upgrade speeds. Together, those kind of efforts, plus the renewal of the basic infrastructure like Portal Bridge, is going to help us take minutes off and eventually a full half hour overtime.
How about the ride?
Ride quality, absolutely. The ride quality is really poor, primarily because much of the railroad has never been what's called undercut, which is that the ballast and sub-ballast, the elements that hold the track underneath, haven't been replaced in decades. So we are undertaking a comprehensive program to redo that foundation. It's really that foundation plus the track structure that produces a good ride quality. Additionally, our new equipment will help as well. But a lot of work to do there, and we're committed to doing it as is New Jersey Transit and our other partners.
Thank you. Mr. Corbett, this question is for you. What lines, I'm thinking in terms, let me explain myself. I'm thinking in terms of getting the people in my district to the Meadowlands where there are jobs there through extending the light rail into the Meadowlands to get cars out of the streets and get people to those jobs. Are we considering that in the near future?
Yes, I think, Congressman, there's two things, certainly, and you're aware, and I'm sure Congressman Moulton will appreciate, this Saturday with the Army-Navy game, 20th anniversary of 9/11 is going to be held at MetLife Stadium in Secaucus. So we have a very good, thanks to your support, the last 4 years really made tremendous strides in turning around New Jersey Transit for our commuter services and our direct services that will be running, for example, to the game, this weekend.
Yeah, but I'm talking from my district.
Yeah, so that gets into
in other words, the light rail ends in North Bergen.
Right. So that is in parallel, not from the Northeast Corridor Commission side, but pulling in, we, as you may recall, last year, even through the pandemic, we did a independent of Amtrak, just on our commuter rails, looking at extending that up and we did a innovation challenge to look public-private partnership to see how we can do that. But that will be in concert with the service we connect at the Northeast Corridor at Secaucus. That serves.
I think with the people that own the mall, a partnership will greatly improve people accessing the mall, plus getting cars out of the roads and into the games. I mean, once the games are there, you can hardly move through there.
Absolutely. The traffic is post-pandemic as well.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to say about Amtrak, I ride it. People are very nice. And even when you don't wear your mask, they're very pleasant when they tell you, please wear the mask. And could you please improve the Wi-Fi? That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I associate myself with those comments for us that ride the Northeast Corridor to get here to Washington. Next, we have Ms. Steele. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all the witnesses coming out today. And, we are grateful. Ms. DiMartino, it is a pleasure to see you, and I appreciate your continued advocacy for Orange County taxpayers. In your testimony, you outlined concerns with the current state Amtrak cost methodology. I share your concerns regarding transparency and accountability with state taxpayers' money. Can you discuss a specific example of when the services your agency received did not align the cost charged by Amtrak?
Thank you, Congresswoman Steele, for that question. I mentioned a few concerns earlier, but let me provide a simple example of a recent challenge that we faced when I asked Amtrak to provide the cost to run an additional train to assure that we could support our anticipated high ridership during the holiday season. Amtrak was not able to provide that specific information in a timely manner. We chose to run the train not understanding exactly what it would cost. And this phrase was used earlier, that's no way to run a railroad. We are certainly hopeful that the cost formula update will help solve these issues in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. And next question is Secretary Kim. David, it's so nice seeing you that I've known you so many years. But let me ask this question. Can you elaborate in how the agency is working to find waste and wrongdoing in the state transportation programs? Because in your testimony, you mentioned that infrastructure package presents numerous funding opportunities for California high-speed rail project that that I've been so much against. It's already failed policy. Can you elaborate on how much federal funding you will requesting from this infrastructure bill for the California high-speed rail? According to a recent LA Times article, the California high-speed rail project creates serious ongoing problems in communities it plans to operate through. In the Central Valley, streets have been torn up, and largest homeless shelter in the Central Valley lost half of its land because it was in the way of the project. And another homeless mission in Bakersfield may be demolished to build the line. Meanwhile, working-class San Jose neighborhood with a large Latino population lies in the path of the track. Given this information, how does California high-speed rail specifically impact communities who lose their homeless shelters and have California high-speed rail-related noise in their backyard or by their local hospitals?
Ms. Steele, it's so good to see you. We've known each other for many years, as you noted. And on this issue, let's just say we have a friendly disagreement with respect to the impact of high-speed rail on disadvantaged communities. In Fresno and Bakersfield, you specifically mentioned those cities and homeless shelters. High-speed rail authority entered into agreements and settlements with those respective homeless shelters to essentially make them whole and to enable them to continue their operations in other parts of the city. The high-speed rail authority received compliments from the mayors of Fresno and Bakersfield on the high-speed rail authority's efforts to address those issues. And so we take heart in that. In terms of San Jose, I think there are several inaccuracies in the article you referenced. There was never a plan to build a 50-mile viaduct between San Jose and San Francisco. We are required by state law to build a blended system in the South Bay of the Bay Area, a blended system with Caltrain commuter rail service. And so that's what we're doing. At a high level, I do want to say the board members of the High Speed Rail Authority have made crystal clear to authority staff that to the extent there are impacts to affected communities, the High Speed Rail Authority staff is to work closely and to coordinate with them to address any and all impacts, to mitigate them as much as possible, and to leave those communities in better shape than before. That is their charge. That is what we are committed to do, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Well, you know, the original cost for $30 billion to over $100 billion, and certain sections supposed started, but it's not even started yet. So it's, to me, it's a just waste taxpayers' money. I have actually 4 more questions, but I'm gonna submit since my time is up, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding back. Next, we have Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Payne, for holding this hearing, and thanks to all the witnesses today. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement from the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm a strong supporter of expanding our intercity passenger rail services. The record investment in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provide us with the once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a better and more robust national passenger rail system, but we have to use the funding wisely. First, let me ask Mr. Gardner, you note in your testimony that Amtrak has a robust plan to expand service using funding from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. Can you expand on Amtrak's vision for increasing rail service, especially in the Midwest and in particular out of its Chicago hub?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. Be happy to do that. And as I noticed, you submitted the comments from the Midwest team, and they've been doing a great job driving planning here, and we've been very pleased to work with them. So we have a robust plan for expanded service from Chicago, radiating all through the Midwest. We've proposed increases in service, certainly both north to Milwaukee and extend service west from there to Madison and to the Twin Cities, service downstate in Illinois, improvements and increases across all of the Illinois services, and then additional service to Michigan, one of our biggest and fastest growing services there, and service through to Indiana. So we really have proposed a comprehensive plan. And I would note the FRA just recently introduced their plan for the Midwest and working with all the states and communities and Amtrak there, which we support. So there's a great opportunity. As I mentioned in my testimony, the FRA will drive the development of this network through their corridor development plan, and Amtrak and states and others will be able to offer our views there. But we're looking forward to working with the FRA on these opportunities.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you 2 questions briefly, if you would respond, because I have another question I want to ask some of the other panelists. What steps is Amtrak taking to coordinate potential expansion plans and infrastructure projects with commuter agencies? And 2, do you commit to working with Metra in the Chicagoland region to minimize impacts to their service and to collaborate on infrastructure investments that benefit both services?
Well, to answer the last one first, yes, we do commit to work with Metra, and we have a good working relationship with Metra on a number of fronts. They, of course, utilize our station at Chicago Union Station. We utilize their railroad lines in a number of locations in around Chicago. So that partnership is really important. And to develop those partnerships, generally, we are engaging with each of our potential host railroads and partners to look for those opportunities for joint funding and to go after these opportunities for growth to support both intercity and commuter. We want to see rail grow passenger, intercity, and commuter everywhere across the United States. It makes sense.
Great, thank you. For the other panelists, Mr. Ross, Ms. White, and Ms. DiMartino, you've each had different experiences with freight railroads as the host railroad for your respective services. What can Congress do to help you as you discuss expanding and improving passenger rail service with your freight railroad? You'll have about 15 seconds each.
Congressman, thank you. I think it's enforcing the will of Congress and the law that set up Amtrak in the beginning is, as the chairman talked about in the beginning, that people have a preference over freight. Now, we understand that we all have to work together to do that, but we think there are many ways that Amtrak and other hosts can work together with the freight to get this done, but the law has to be enforced.
Thank you, Ms. White.
Thank you, Congressman. I would say that the money in the IIJA is going to be really important. As we work, for example, on the S line, it is an FRA grant that enables us to acquire that line from CSX and enables us to grow freight rail on it at the same time as passenger. So we'll be looking to the IIJA for those funds to build the infrastructure that allows both freight and passenger to grow. So I think you've done the work we need of you, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. And Ms. DiMartino, I apologize. If you could submit your written answer, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back. Next, we have Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I stated to you privately, if I had your wardrobe, I'd burn mine. So thank you. I notice I'm wearing my Carhartt. Oh, well.
The gentleman is very kind.
I got a little cold up here. Mr. Gardner, in your testimony, you mentioned that Amtrak's ridership is still only 65 to 70% of what it was before COVID-19. How do you plan to restore ridership to 2019 levels, and when do you expect that to happen?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. We are, as I said, working hard already to grow new riders. We certainly do hope to get in that high 70s or 80% of our pre-COVID ridership if this year, as we restore all of our service over the course of the year. But it's going to take several years. I wish I could give you a clear, definitive answer. A lot depends on the pandemic. A lot will depend on business travel. While a lot of our service is being patronized, a lot of that travel, of course, is leisure travel, and revenues are a lot less than the business travel market. So we're working hard to grow there, but we do feel confident that over the next several years, we'll be able to bring back that 32.5 million ridership we had attained and grow from there, because the situation that created value for passenger rail, which is congestion on the highways, desire to have a more comfortable trip with productivity, like being able to use your computer and get up and walk around, have a nice meal. Those things are appealing to a broad section of Americans, and particularly our new younger generation. So we think that rail makes sense. And of course, the pandemic has dampened all of transportation, but we're optimistic and confident that it will return, and we're going to be doing everything we can to help ensure that growth and offer a safe and compelling service.
I also understand that Amtrak is planning to either expand or build a new rail corridors in 26 states across the country over the next 15 years. And I was wondering what makes you think Amtrak will turn a profit in any of those communities when the current rail corridors have been losing money for 50 years?
Well, thanks for that question. So we have proposed these corridors working with our state partners for development. And of course, that'll also depend on the Department of Transportation and their priorities as they set out a plan for the investments. But I would be clear here that our expectation is that these corridors do require support from states and the federal government, that they produce real value and support a lot of important transportation needs, but we measure those not necessarily by the profit or of the fare box, so to speak, even though Amtrak has the highest fare box recovery of any system in the United States by far in terms of rail systems. We believe that Amtrak's mission is to create mobility that creates value. We do that with as little public funding as we can, but the current services do require support and investment, and I think that's fair. All transportation modes require investment, and this is one area where you can see it quite clearly in our service because it's localized in Amtrak and our state partners. But those investments produce dividends, and frankly, there really is no path that we can see for the mobility needs of the nation as we add another 100 million or so folks to the country over the next 20 or 30 years that doesn't involve a lot more passenger rail. And as that happens, hopefully our finances can improve. Certainly on the Northeast Corridor, we've demonstrated that we can operate a very commercial-oriented service and generate net operating surplus.
Let me stop you. I'm going to run out of time. You're good at running out the clock, and I can appreciate your skills there. Since you mentioned that you needed more funding down the line, don't you think it'd be better to make your current service corridors more just profitable before you build new ones in other parts of the country?
Well, we are focused on improving the existing corridors. Many of those corridors can be served by higher speeds or additional frequencies. So we are focused on that. But we think over the course of the next 15 years, we've got to get more service in places in America where more people now live. The Southeast, the Mountain West, the South, West Coast. Population growth has been huge, and yet many of these places we barely serve, if serve at all. So as a matter of equity and investment, we think many of those communities deserve passenger rail and can get benefits from it.
Mr. Chairman, I believe I've run out of my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Next, we will have Mr. Johnson from Georgia. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank the witnesses, all of you, for your testimony. Mr. Ross, I understand that you, rather than flying from Mississippi to DC, you decided to take Amtrak. Tell us about how was your trip, and did your train arrive on time? And if so, and if not, why not?
Thank you, Congressman. I try to use the service that I promote, and so I did ride the Crescent up from Meridian to Washington, D.C. And let me first say that the onboard staff was excellent. They thanked me for my patronage, and they served me very well, and I appreciate them. We were about an hour and a half late coming into D.C., and the problem was a train left NOUPT New Orleans on time. And before it got to its first stop, it was an hour and a half late. And because of freight train interference with Norfolk Southern. We also had some signaling and PTC issues in Birmingham. And so it never was able to really make that up. And I think that is the most concerning part of making especially long distance train travel acceptable and for more people and useful for more people, is making sure these trains run on time. And there are a lot of different ways to do that.
Well, let me ask you, Amtrak has been forced to effectively cede its statutory right to priority over freight trains, even though that is in violation of current law. When Amtrak can't run trains on time, that disincentivizes Americans from relying on passenger rail as their primary mode of transportation, and that undercuts economic development. Meanwhile, freights face no penalty for causing the delay, and Amtrak, as a quasi-public-private entity, does not have the right to sue. But for passenger rail to succeed, we must prioritize on-time trains, and I agree with you. Mr. Ross, what actions can the Department of Transportation and the Federal Rail Administration take to address this imbalance, and what language do you recommend for future legislation that would compel freights to obey the law?
I think there's two things. The first is giving Amtrak the right to sue in times when there's just no other way to resolve the problem. We should work with our freight partners to try to resolve this problem, but there are intractable times that there's no other alternative. and they should have the right to do that. But through the IIJA and the investments in passenger rail that will happen around the country, part of that can be used to improve capacity in areas that it is admittedly limited. For example, between Meridian, Mississippi and Birmingham, Alabama, it is very difficult to get the train across there because of the amount of traffic and the capacity of the railroad.
And Mr. Ross, I understand that freights also refuse to share vital data with the FRA, which even about essential information such as the number of trains on the track and the length of a train and congestion delays. This information is necessary to understand the infrastructure needed to expand passenger rail service. And freights insist that such information is proprietary knowledge, and it's not. And they undercut the FRA's ability to do its job. The FRA should be the arbiter of truth with the ability to ask and receive the kind of information that it needs. Mr. Ross, do you agree that this information is necessary to leverage the funding in the new infrastructure law and support improved, expanded passenger rail service?
Absolutely. While we recognize the right of host railroads to proprietary information like rates and things like that, it's certainly not proprietary to know how many trains operate a day. Anybody can go out and just watch that and see it. Things like that are very important to protect the taxpayers' investment in expanded passenger rail that will also benefit the movement of freight. And so it's very important that the FRA, as you said, the arbiter of these things, has access to that basic information that should be very reasonable and easily gotten to be able to make proper decisions.
Well, let me ask you this. What steps need to be taken so that the FRA can compel freights to share relevant modeling and data and conduct its oversight successfully?
Congressman, in my testimony, I have language to that effect, and we'll be happy to share that with you or expand on it.
Thank you so much. I remember fondly trips that my family used to make on the Nancy Hanks from Atlanta down to Sandersville, Georgia, serving all of the small towns in between, and look forward to getting back to those days where we have a vibrant passenger rail service that serves throughout our southern states. Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman yields back. Now we have my good friend from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. And my question's for Mr. Gardner. Mr. Gardner, thank you for being with us today. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides considerable funding for Amtrak to invest in the Northeast Corridor and their national network. Sir, in my Southeastern Pennsylvania district, Amtrak's construction schedule changes and delays, oftentimes made with limited advance notice, can negatively impact the operating schedules and on-time performance for SEPTA, which many of my constituents depend on for their local rail commuting. Fortunately, it's been a persistent problem under Amtrak's current funding levels. So my question is, what specific measures, sir, is Amtrak willing to take or currently taking to correct these issues? And going forward, how will Amtrak manage projects to ensure that SEPTA customers, many of whom are my constituents, are not adversely affected by all of the work planned under the IIJA?
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for that question and for your support for Amtrak and rail investment. I understand your question exactly. We work very hard to develop a comprehensive program through the Northeast Corridor Commission for every year that lays out the capital work that's going to be undertaken on every aspect of the railroad. And Kevin Corbett, the co-chair, helps lead that process. And that requires Amtrak to come forward, all the owners of the infrastructure come forward early on prior to the future fiscal year, develop with our developed plans for work and run these plans by all of the impacted railroads and gain concurrence about the work outages that'll be necessary and the service impacts. To your point, there are going to be service impacts as we do all this work. We've got decades of investment to now put into the railroad, but we need to take a very proactive approach to try and manage that preserve good service for our customers while we're rebuilding. And a lot of the work that the Northeast Corridor Commission and our Connect 35 plan is about exactly that, modeling the whole railroad, all these different projects, and trying to find that best sequence of work so that we don't impact service more than necessary and we get the work done efficiently. So we're committed to doing that. We're scaling up our capacity so that we can get these jobs done on time and within the windows. And we're going to work cooperatively with SEPTA to make sure that they can meet their customers' needs and your constituents' needs.
That'd be very much appreciated, sir. My second and final question is regarding the liability issue between SEPTA and Amtrak, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's been an ongoing issue. And in June, I submitted an amendment that passed the House for a GAO report to further look into the varying liability agreements in place between Amtrak and commuter rails along the Northeast Corridor. Sir, could you tell us if any progress is being made in this dispute?
So the liability issue on the Northeast Corridor is a complicated one. It's one that the Northeast Corridor Commission has been looking at for many years to try and find a common path forward to deal with the many different liability regimes that exist amongst the 4 owners and 8 operators that share the parts of the railroad here. The commission has set out a deadline for the end of 2022 to further advance some studies and work collectively to try and come up with a path that we could implement over the next couple of years. Amtrak is committed to finding a path forward, but one that's standard across the corridor, given that we are both a tenant and an owner, and we need to have a relationship that makes sense for all the different entities that work there. We are making progress individually with SEPTA on some of the liability issues as they relate to projects that we undertake, joint projects. And in fact, I believe we're waiting for just agreement from SEPTA on a proposal that we've been working on together. So we want to make incremental progress, and we continue to work with our colleagues up and down the corridor and the department about how we deal with the broader issue of liability between the entities.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. I mean, as you know, I put a lot of work into getting this infrastructure bill across the finish line. I'm a big supporter of rail across the country. And my customers are very, very dependent on SEPTA. So if you could do your part, sir, to maintain that good relationship, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely. I have a chance to meet with the head of SEPTA every month, and it's a really important relationship for Amtrak, and I know we can do a lot of great things together.
Thank you, sir. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back within the 5 minutes, and we thank him. Next, we have Mr. Auchincloss, gentleman from Massachusetts, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bipartisan infrastructure bill includes $66 billion above current funding levels to eliminate the Amtrak maintenance backlog, modernize the Northeast Corridor, and bring world-class rail service to areas outside the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. And Massachusetts will be eligible to compete for $5 billion in rail improvements and safety grants and $3 billion for grade crossing safety improvements. One of the most urgent and consistent needs I have heard from my constituents is for commuter rail platforms that are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Stations in Wellesley and Newton receive questions and calls from many of our wheelchair-bound and sight-impaired residents who cannot access the train. For example, one of my constituents lives in an affordable housing unit within Wellesley Square and can easily get to the station, but cannot get to the train. The infrastructure bill sponsored by my colleagues on the committee, Congressman Garcia and Congresswoman Newman, it concludes a component sponsored by those two that establishes a program to make ADA compliant upgrades at legacy transit and commuter rail authorities. And the All Station Accessibility Program establishes a $1.7 billion competitive grant program to assist eligible entities in financing capital project upgrades. And in my district, the commuter rail stations in Newton and Wellesley are past due for these kinds of upgrades. Mr. Corbett, how is the Northeast Corridor Commission working with the Department of Transportation to set up the application process?
Our staff are working. I touched on, thank you, Congressman, for the question, that we're looking at the harmonization issue. You know, the grants that we see coming out, in which category those grants come through. Certainly the ADA issue is critical along the Northeast Corridor for the commission, but also for us in New Jersey Transit, where we have hundreds of stations that were built, 1920s that are not ADA compliant with full elevated platforms. So we're talking billions and billions of dollars to bring the whole Northeast Corridor commuter rails up to, as well as the, along Amtrak's right away. So the harmonization and looking how we can accelerate that within the guidance of legislation with FRA and FTA would help expedite that tremendously.
What can the Mass Bay Transportation Authority do to work with the commission to ensure that the Framingham Worcester line upgrades in Newton and Wellesley are prioritized?
That is certainly from the state of Massachusetts sets the priorities and their representatives, and then we work within the commission. If something requires a legislative fix, we would come back. If it's within the guidelines of the framework that we operate under on the commission, then we could do that, within the commission.
What makes a grant competitive for this program?
I think we're still waiting to digest what's come out of the bill, in details, the guidance from FTA or FRA programs. I can let Stephen maybe could talk better to specifically for the $66 billion for Amtrak, but generally for on the competitive grants versus a formula funding, the ability to have the preliminary engineering, the studies done so that we may not have full engineering, but that we can then move the environmental process as rapidly as possible for the larger projects.
Well, we're working on, we'll have the schematics for the Newton commuter rail stations in particular. Those will be ready to go 30 to 100% design complete over the next few years. So look forward to working with you on prioritizing those projects.
Having the money up front with this commitment that came through legislation, some people, they used to talk about shovel ready, but the contractors, the engineering design firms, until they know the money is there and we cannot commit for funds we don't have. So having that funding commitment is critical for the industry to be able to move these projects quickly.
Great.
Thank you.
Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back. Next, we have the gentleman for Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes. We will have the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes. You're on mute, sir.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming today, Mr. Ross, for the great work of the Southern Rail Commission. As a longtime public servant, I've been a part of many discussions about the promise and the challenges of regional passenger services. I'm happy to know that with the passage of the infrastructure bill, that we have an opportunity to make that a reality. In your testimony, you mentioned support for the area of establishing rail between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. As you know, this is something that's been critically important to the people of Louisiana for a very long time. And we're equally as important about rapid rail between New Orleans and Mobile. But the thought of having high quality, fast alternative way to get across the region is one of my top priorities. For years, people in my district have heard plans of rail between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And now we have an opportunity to make it a reality. And we're very excited about that. Can you talk about the status of establishing passenger rail between New Orleans and Baton Rouge?
Yes, sir. And welcome aboard, Congressman. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, sir.
Yesterday in New Orleans, CP committed to an initial round trip between Baton Rouge and New Orleans with no capacity investment needed. And they also committed to looking at a second round trip. It's just that they have to have time to evaluate to see what capacity improvements have to be done to implement that service. This is a historic move, and we've been working very hard with Canadian Pacific to create a good partnership going forward that can be beneficial both for Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, the I-20 corridor, and they have committed to us to work with us on all of those services. But Baton Rouge, New Orleans is going to happen, and CP has committed to that. They've committed to that in their Surface Transportation Board filing. So, Congressman, yesterday was a historic day for that, and we were very excited about it. And it really shows the benefit of commissions like the Southern Rail Commission, because we were able to hold that project together when Louisiana under a previous administration refused the money to build this project. And
We
we were able
remember
to
that,
keep it alive.
we remember that oh too well.
Yes, sir.
And
And we
I
do too.
cannot tell you how grateful I am to you, Mr. Ross, and the Southern Rail Commission for the incredible work that you do and have continued to do to hold this project together. We were all very disappointed when that previous administration under Governor Jindal, for whatever reason, rejected those resources, and we missed a great opportunity. So grateful that we're back on track and that this will become a reality for the people of Louisiana.
Congressman, I would be remiss, the person I think who has held this together in Louisiana would be my fellow commissioner and our Vice Chairman, John Spain. He has been instrumental in using the Southern Rail Commission to keep this alive and to keep it across administrations, across DOTD secretaries. And I think it also demonstrates that these multi-state commissions work.
And then let me join you in giving a huge shout out to John Spain, who's
That's
been
right.
a great advocate and a friend and has and giving me briefings on this project and has been a stalwart, someone that we're very fortunate to have in our corner. So real quickly, let me ask you this before my time elapses. Are there any obstacles out there, anything that we can do from Congress or from this transportation led by my very able Chairman, Mr. Payne, that we can do to assist in advancing this very critical issue for the people of Louisiana?
Well, you've put the funding in place with the transportation bill. This is a huge step forward for us. And we will be using, in my testimony, I talked about all the different programs we will be using. It really is going to take a local, state, and federal push to get this done. And all parties have committed to that. The Super Region Commission down there, the individual cities have put up money for stations and have bought station sites. I think you all have put the pieces in place to get this done. It's up to us to put the puzzle together to make it work. And we believe we can do that.
Well, look, I stand on the ready to do anything that I can do to be a bridge to pull any of that together now that we put the funding in place to be an additional resource. As I mentioned, this is one of my #1 priorities, recognizing the huge impact it will have environmentally, economically, and all the way around for the people of Louisiana. This is a huge win, and I'm so proud to be a part and so proud to be here to thank you, to thank John Spain, to thank the entire commission for the yeoman effort, and most importantly, to thank President Biden for putting forth this BIF that's given us the opportunity to have the kind of resources that we can do things that have long been talked about, but never actually done. So this is a great day. Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Next, we will have the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have two competing hearings going on, so I have to jump off every once in a while, but I do want to say thank you to all of our witnesses for attending. And I was very pleased. It warmed my heart to hear Mr. Gardner talk about working with his employees and his unions, the rail unions, because when I voted for the transportation and infrastructure bill, I felt I was keeping faith with my rail workers. And I was keeping faith with my rail unions that advocated for a lot of the things in that bill. And I just hope that you all as operators remember that going forward, that we expect our rail workers and our rail unions to be partners and to be treated fairly. I was also keeping faith with President Biden. I don't think there's been anyone in government ever in the history of this country that has been so closely affiliated with travel by rail. And I was keeping faith with my environmental activists because they see rail and the future of rail as being one of the solutions, as a cleaner and greener solution to one of our big challenges on climate change. And I was keeping faith really with my housing activists. Now, you might not think that is a natural connection, but with the challenges that I have in the city of Boston with housing, one of our big solutions, I think, and I've been working with Mr. Neal on this, is to really, if we make rail attractive, efficient, comfortable, a good experience, it will open up a much wider area to develop affordable housing that is connected to the jobs that are mostly in the greater Boston area. So we see that as being a real opportunity. So I just want to thank you for your work. I do believe in a national system, so I have listened keenly to the concerns of the Southeast Rail Coalition and my partners in the Midwest and down in Texas and out in California. And I really do believe we have to work on this together. So I'm not just talking about improvements and access on the Northeast Corridor, although that is important because of the volume of passengers. But I do want to work on this together. One of the reasons, and I'm not going to ask anybody any questions, so you can relax on that. But one of the reasons that I asked to be a member of this committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, is because when you look across Congress, it was one of the last bastions of bipartisanship, where we worked together and did the right thing on behalf of the American people. And I was dying for some of that, because of what else is going on. So I hope that and I'm talking to my colleagues, my colleagues across the aisle and my colleagues in the majority, and all of you, I hope that we can put some of the divisiveness away. I was not encouraged by the markup we had on this bill. It was purely infrastructure, and it was really an opportunity for us to come together. That's why I came to this committee, because I want to be working with my colleagues across the aisle. I want to help them on their issues in their districts. I was an iron worker for about 20 years. I was president of my union, but I travel quite a bit, and I see the infrastructure needs of this entire country. So just a word of hope, I guess, is that we can, and I give great credit to Pete DeFazio. He really, it starts at the top with him and Mr. Graves. I think they try to set the right example and the right tone so that we work together. But I hope we get back to that, because, America needs us. America needs us. And, I think we should try to rise to the highest expectations of the American people than bickering and fighting over us. And transportation and infrastructure, and certainly rail, give us a perfect opportunity to do something good for the American people and really, build a public platform for private investment. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I thank the gentleman. It was perfect. 1 second left. We appreciate it. Now we will have the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to join the subcommittee for today's hearing on a topic that is critically important to the people of my state of Arizona. I wanted to be here because Arizona and Phoenix and Tucson in particular were the largest cities in the United States without access to passenger rail service. As other communities have gained access to passenger rail, they've experienced significant new economic opportunity as well. But Arizona has missed out thus far. I'm hopeful that that will change, and there is reason for optimism. Amtrak has proposed connecting Arizona's two large and fast-growing metropolitan areas, Phoenix and Tucson, with frequent and reliable passenger rail service. That means opportunity for the people of Arizona, opportunity to connect our communities, make them more accessible and productive, and more internationally competitive. Opportunity to boost our regional economies with better access to jobs and more private investment along the route. Opportunity to ease congestion along Interstate 10 and help reduce air pollution. Arizonans have wanted passenger train service between Phoenix and Tucson for decades. So it is no surprise that this proposal has already generated significant local support. The mayors of Phoenix and Tucson and other communities along the proposed line, they're fully on board. And I would like to include for the record, Mr. Chairman, their letters of support.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. I have a question for Mr. Gardner, President of Amtrak. The infrastructure plan that was passed by this Congress invested in passenger rail. And Amtrak CEO called the bill absolutely transformational. That means the American people, including those of us in Arizona, we rightfully have big expectations. Mr. Gardner, given the lack of passenger rail between Tucson and Phoenix and the strong local and regional support for the project, as well as the significant resources provided to get the job done under the infrastructure law, what steps is Amtrak taking to advance and accelerate the development of the Tucson-Phoenix West Valley rail line?
Thank you, Congressman, and we wholeheartedly share your enthusiasm for this corridor. As you noted, Phoenix is fifth largest city in the nation and is not directly served by Amtrak. And those are the kind of omissions in today's network that we fundamentally need to address, and we're so excited by the investment in the bill to do so. As I mentioned before, the next steps to develop this plan for corridor development across the country is with the Federal Railroad Administration, and we are going to be providing all of our input, the entire Amtrak Connexus plan and all of the underlying data to them. Additionally, we are looking to advance partnerships with Nevada and the two big cities and other communities to start taking our planning and moving it to the next level of granularity. As you know, we've got a existing Union Pacific route that heads to Phoenix that needs to be upgraded for service. We have the existing route that we operate over on today's Sunset Limited to Tucson to the east. So we have part of that route in place, and what we need to do is really focus in on that western portion to get us to Phoenix. But we're all in on this project in terms of our excitement, enthusiasm, and really are ready to partner with the state and the communities to start that next phase of planning, and then be ready to go after opportunities with the Federal Railroad Administration as they move to the grant funding and the further planning stages.
That's great, and I certainly will help be your partner when it comes to advocating for this line. I know that Amtrak is going to keep its word that it made to the people of Phoenix and Tucson as you were advocating for passage of the infrastructure bill to get the job done. I think a fair question would be, assuming we're successful in the grant process, getting that approval process through the federal government, assuming Amtrak keeps its word about your advancing the planning process, what would be the timing, best case scenario, the timing of beginning this critically important line?
Well, Congressman, I think we've got some more work to do before we can know that exactly. A lot of it's going to depend on Union Pacific, who's the owner of the railway, and the need to upgrade that infrastructure. Also, we've heard a lot from communities about investing in stations. That's going to be critically important and is something that could happen soon. But we need to work with that host railroad, Union Pacific, to get a good plan forward. So I think that's a critical step, is getting Union Pacific on board to work with us to advance this service. And that's going to really set the pace for the overall service. We'll be working on our side to make sure we've got the equipment ready and the other things that we can bring, but we need that willing host railroad partner.
All right, Mr. Chairman, my time is up, so I yield back. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. And that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to again thank each of the witnesses for your testimony today. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record for today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.